Delta faucets to Behr paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Support also provided by the Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit PBS.
DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit PBS. Among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving, we support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Learn more at dtefoundation.com.
We help organizations find their voices through what they do and who they impact. We are VVK PR and Creative, a Detroit agency telling the stories of critical issues affecting the big picture and the small moments. Stories at Skyline Heights and on-the-ground influence. We lead with relationships first, solutions always, and with diversity as our compass. VVK PR and Creative.
Nissan Foundation, and viewers like you.
And to moderate the discussion, please welcome Michigan Senator Sarah Anthony.
All right. Can you all hear me okay? Yes. Okay, I like the call and response. I feel like I'm at a black church. Y'all all right? This is a powerful room full of powerful people, and we have an outstanding panel to talk about something that I know is on the minds of just about everybody. Whether you are a developer, a single mom, a college student trying to figure out where you want to place roots, either in Michigan or some other place in the country, housing is on everyone's mind. And we know we have a housing crisis. If you didn't, you probably are in the wrong panel, because everyone is talking about our housing crisis. Now, many of us see this as a social justice issue. Whether you are someone who is in the development space, trying to help solve the issue that is plaguing our cities, even here in northern Michigan, it's very different than my hometown in Lansing, in which I can hear from the Capitol folks protesting just about every other week, telling me that the rent is too damn high. Or the housing supply, which is what brings us here today with this powerful panel. So we'll start there. My first question will go to our director. Amy, talk to me about what do you feel like...
I feel like I'm on Jeopardy. I'm just saying, look, my first question.
Yeah. Consider me more like Oprah. An engaging conversation. What do you feel like is driving our housing crisis?
Well, I think it's the title of the session. It's all about supply. We do not have enough housing units for our families. And basic economics are, if you are short on supply and high on demand, the cost increases. So we really have to help the market. The market is not working how it should. If it did, our building permits would be way up and people would be building and we would have the housing we need. However, it costs too much to develop housing compared to what Michiganders can afford to pay. And when you're out of balance like that, it throws us into the housing crisis we're in today.
That's right. Now, Glenn, tell me a little bit about your perspective in terms of what's driving this crisis, and really just from the grassroots perspective, what do you see as contributing to this crisis?
I mean, thank you so much, but there are multiple things that are contributing to this problem. And I mean, Amy spoke to it already. She just touched a little bit on it, but she was just talking about the cost. I mean, the cost, even if we just start from there, I mean, in Genesee County, you're building, just say, a 1,500 square foot house. Just when we don't talk about home ownership, we just start there. 1,500 square foot house, no garage, no basement, $300,000. Now, when you think about that, the Michigan median income, you can't afford that. If the mortgage is $2,700 a month, that's 48% of your income with the Michigan median income. So when you think about those particular numbers, how are people supposed to have that home ownership opportunity? From a multifamily perspective, in Genesee County, Detroit, Michigan, I think we have a need for a few 100,000 units of housing, like statewide. Because I mean, in Michigan, in Flint just alone, we have a need for about 17,000 in Genesee County. That's for very low, moderate income. So that's 30% AMI and below. So when you start thinking about those numbers in the totality of that problem, and it's just getting larger, larger, and larger, there is not much that you can do other than trying to find ways to support housing in other creative ways. But the thing is, right now, I mean, I could say this all day, but the math don't math. You know, it doesn't math at all. So unless we get additional resources to be able to solve that problem, you're going to continue to see low-income families. But guess what? This is not a partisan issue either. Right. This is something that goes across both. If you don't have a wealthy person in your family, if you don't have someone that's passing down a home, it's going to be very hard for you to get, one, the American dream, or two, to be able to start just to have a nice home or an apartment with your family. So we have to really think about how do we increase economics for these families and wealth, as well as providing additional sources of funds to be able to fill these gaps on these projects.
That's right. That's right. Now, Mayor Duggan, how you doing?
You're good to see you, Senator.
Good to see you. Good to see you. There is no one in the state, and really even in the country, that could deny that Detroit is in a complete renaissance. That, you know, whether it's the economic development, what has been happening in terms of arts, entertainment, culture, and you've also, alongside your team, taken major steps to revitalize aging housing. And, well, I won't speak to you. I won't speak for you.
You were doing fine for
Was
me.
I doing okay? Listen, tell me, what steps has the city done in order to address this crisis for our largest city in the state?
Well, we've been fortunate. It's been 10 years I've been mayor now, and we've had a city council unified on a commitment to this. And we just had our announcement that we did $1 billion in affordable housing projects in the last 5 years in the city of Detroit. You will not find any homeless encampments in the city of Detroit because of our aggressiveness. But we started, I see Donald Renscher, one of our housing directors, former housing directors in the room. We started with this. You cannot kick out the people who are in your existing affordable housing. And you saw it happen in Brooklyn, you saw it happen in Washington, D.C., you saw it happen in Austin, Texas, and this is where we started. How many people in this room understand the economics of affordable housing? Okay, so for the third of the room who understands this, what I'm going to say is a gross oversimplification. The rest of you are going to love it because you're going to understand it. But here's basically it. You want to build an apartment complex where to rent out the apartment units and make money is going to cost you $1,200 a month. But affordable in the city of Detroit is $800 a month. Nobody's going to build apartments for $1,200 and rent them out for $800. Somebody has to pay that gap. And the way it's basically done in this country is through federal tax credits. They have something they call LIHTC. And when you boil it all the way, basically the feds say this: we'll pay 70% of the cost of your new building. And in exchange for paying 70% of the cost, for the next 30 years, you're going to rent it out for $800 a month. That's how we get affordable housing. When the 30 years runs out, you own that property. And across America, the folks who have been there, a lot of times senior citizens, the only home they've ever known, got kicked out, and the apartment goes market rate. That's the story you've seen over and over in America. When I came in, I had great leadership, Arthur Jemerson and the like, and they said, you realize we're going to have 10,000 housing units in the next 6 years that the 30 years are going to run out on. And in addition to our problem, we're going to have 10,000 more folks kicked out to the street with no place to go. We sat down with them 6 months a year ahead of it running out. And we said to them, we'll make you a deal. We'll put you at the front of the line for another 30-year renewal, get it renovated, and you can make money for the next 30 years. Or you can kick folks out and go market rate. Only thing is, Detroit has the highest property tax rates in America. And you actually can't make money at market rate in Detroit without some subsidy. And you kick these folks out and you ain't getting a damn thing from City Hall. The first guy signed up for 30 years. The second guy signed up for 30 years. We've now had 10,000 housing units come up for renewal. All 10,000 signed up for another 30 years. We haven't had a single affordable housing unit go market rate. So when you don't make the problem work, that's the starting point. And then once the culture got into it, then we just made it a point, project by project for every new project, that a percentage was affordable. And it's a reason why, I won't tell you it's a struggle. We're going to do another $1 billion over the next 5 years the way it's going. But somebody has to pay that difference. And right now the question is Amy going to find ways to supplement the federal government to make this happen even faster? And I know she's got the solution.
Sarah does.
Sarah does. Oh, Sarah's going to help us do it.
Is that why they put me on this? Is that why I'm here? It's all good. So, but thank you. I mean, you know, again, Detroit's approach has been inspirational to a lot of cities across the state and across the country. I'm going to go to our other city, Ann Arbor, which just a few years ago, there wasn't much in terms of building new in Ann Arbor. And we've seen a shift in that city. Just talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure, that was purposeful. We had a NIMBY City Council, majority council, that voted against low-income senior housing. Half of it was market rate and at below market rate. And I think that was awakening to a lot of residents who are like, what kind of city are we where we would vote against low-income senior housing, right? In the midst of all the other pressures of living in a university town where the university keeps admitting more students, taking more property off the tax rolls. So the response was me, along with other city council members, a voting majority who were solidly YIMBYs, so yes in my backyard, yes on every public parcel. And you can see that as also a response to COVID. You know, we ran in 2020 in the beginning and towards, you know, or in the early days of the pandemic. We're hearing from residents who are worried about whether federal relief was coming, if evictions were going to start. So we started looking around as to what we could do, and a lot of it had to do with rezoning. So we upzoned along transit corridors, we got rid of parking minimums, we had to learn really quickly how financing works, and support city staff who are looking for creative solutions, coming to the state, finding HUD grants, finding partnerships in community and talking to developers who could understand how a very expensive city like Ann Arbor could have a housing crisis. And a lot of it also stems from our reputation as the eighth most economically segregated community in the US, right? We had a lot to answer for. You know, the things that we did, there was political will, and then there was the talents in City Hall that were finally recognized. And I think a lot of the credit goes towards the culture that we were inviting back to City Hall, which is trust in urban planners, trust in their expertise, because electeds, we're elected by our wards, these tiny little wards, right? I'm a social worker by training and stalk urban planners on Twitter, but you know, this is not my field. So, you know, I really appreciate our Assistant City Administrator, John Fournier, who is here, as well as my colleagues, Councilmember Travis Redina and Jen Iyer. So they pulled their weight. They had a vision for the city before we came on board, and we helped push it along.
Did you want to?
Oh, I'm just listening to the last two speakers, just the importance of leadership. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I was super impressed is you know, the vision that Mayor Duggan had for housing in the city and following it through with the money, with looking at the systems and improving permits, and where we see housing recovering most quickly is in communities where there is strong, courageous leadership. Leadership that's willing to do the right things, be consistent and steady enough for us to see the impact long term. And it's just great to see from both of you.
This is a great place to pause to let you know in the center of your tables, you should have a couple of cards. So if you wanted to join the conversation with a question, I just encourage you to write down a question, and then I believe folks will be circling around to collect those cards. Sounds good? All right. Now, I think each of you have talked a little bit about the crisis and how we're approaching these things. Talk to me a little bit about creative solutions that you have either implemented or have seen that are working, either in Michigan or across the nation. And anyone can answer that.
I'll go first. We have been working at MSHDA to do things better. We have our first ever statewide housing partnership that was passed a couple of years ago. And because it's the first ever, we had to figure out how do we implement that plan. And I'm sure if you've heard me speak, you've heard me talk about the governor's foresight in creating the statewide housing partnership, which we have several members here today who oversee the implementation. And we've created 15 regional housing partnerships to really take a look at that plan and figure out what parts of the plan work for each individual region. Because we know not each region needs every single goal to be met. Created plans, amazingly enough, in all 15 regions. And then we created a program called My Neighborhood, in which to help fund the implementation of those plans. If you've worked in community development for very long, you know in the past we've loved to create plans and then we put them on the shelf. We really wanted to make sure that we could implement those. And what we did with the My Neighborhood program is really take a lot of small niche type programs that we had at MSHDA and create one kind of like common app. Right? And so instead of us saying, we're going to fund modular housing, or we're going to fund tiny homes, or for sale, we really wanted to create a program that was responsive to the individual needs and values of each region. And so the My Neighborhood program pretty much funds anything as long as it's housing related for families at 120% or below area median income. With one caveat. The application's activities must be a part of the plan. So it needs to go back to that plan and make sure that we're funding the implementation of the plan. So that program rolled out April 1st. We have had 3 different tranches of funding rounds already. I believe we're close to about $20 million worth of applications that have received reservation from MSHDA. It's also a great way to bring in new developers because it's not the low-income housing tax credit, which is our probably most difficult, complex program that we have at MSHDA, but you can come in for one house or you can come in for 20 units. So it's really kind of will help folks that are new. And I'm telling you, we need a lot more people developing housing in our state. And this is a great program to kind of to get your feet wet, put your toe in the water, come develop a couple units. We've had for sale projects come through. We've had rental, we've had homeowner rehab projects come through. We've also had a tiny home program come through. So we're really excited about it. We're doing lots of things, but that is our new program that we've rolled out, and we're happy.
Awesome. That's awesome. What else?
There's a couple things that I can just add on. I think, Amy, one thing, the Missing Middle program that you had that allowed us to take a 48-unit dilapidated, as you know, at Flint, Orchard Lane Apartments is a dilapidated property, very close to going to foreclosure. It's in a great, stable neighborhood, tipping point neighborhood. We were able to, secure some funding that was allow us to do that, about that $5 million project. But then also right next door, we were able to leverage Missing Middle, and then we were able to build 2 new mixed-use light tech developments. So when you put it all together, it's going to be about 162 units with those 3 developments that are all right next to each other, leveraging those type of funds that MSHDA had available. Like right now in Genesee County, I'm copying one of the playbooks from Ann Arbor. I was just talking to Lynn about this a minute ago, about trying to see if I can get a Genesee County millage that's dedicated to housing. Kalamazoo did it, Ann Arbor, a couple other places around the country are doing that. Also, you got to have dollars that are flexible to address nuance and emerging housing needs that Amy was talking about. If you don't have money that has the flexibility to do some very creative stuff, Mayor Duggan's done a great, done a great job with the Strategic Neighborhood Fund. He'd probably talk more about that. but offering low interest capital. As we're looking to do more developments across the state of Michigan, and we do some work in Indiana, we find that the places that are getting more of the affordable housing and are able to leverage funding like these communities are, is places where they have diverse funding, where they can give you flexible terms, especially on interest rates.
Can you say that one more time really loud?
Which part? Diverse?
Flexible funding sources for housing?
Yes, flexible funding sources, and I'll say that over and over again. If you don't have flexible funding sources, every project does not need a grant. So let me just put that out there, because sometimes people think every project needs a grant. No, I don't need a grant all the time. I just need low interest capital. If I can get a 2%, 3% interest, if Michigan had an ability to do some other creative financing where they can provide construction loans under market, developers could focus on doing what we all need to be doing, which is focusing on building and producing housing for people who most need it in our community, rather than focusing on how to address a gap. Because we had a project that slowed down because we were working, because it was taking so long, because these interest rates are continually climbing. So we started a project at about 4.7% interest, and we're literally just closing right now at 8.5. Wow.
Yeah.
This is within the last 24 months. So that just gives you an idea of what's happening with these particular developments in our community. It's not just happening in cities like Flint, but it's happening in Saginaw, Detroit, India. It's happening everywhere. And the thing is, like I say, this is not a partisan issue. This is an issue that impacts everyone, and we need those additional funding sources to help us to be able to close those gaps. And also dedicating more funds to supportive housing and supportive services that go with it. Things that keep people off the street, keep them in housing, because sometimes we just think about the housing aspect, but not about the people in it. But these communities that you want to have to be safe places, like, oh, let's just build the housing. If we can build the housing, but also think about the people in the housing as well, let's just not forget about that. These are individuals, and just realize we're all one decision or one mishap that can cause us to be that same person that live in affordable housing. And depending on the community that you live in, you might go to Ann Arbor and realize you really don't make that much money once you get that rent bill.
If I may, I'm really glad you brought up our affordable housing millage.
Yep.
That was voted in 2020, and we're just putting those dollars to use because we had to find matches for it. And a project that we just broke ground for a couple of weeks ago is for a 5-story, 63-unit development. Half of it is dedicated to low-income residents, and the other half is for artists, which sounds kind of funny, but it's Ann Arbor. We're really losing our cultural arts community. But what's interesting about the affordable housing millage is that the dollars aren't going far enough. Our costs have gone up by 50%. So one of the things that I've done in the past year is asking City Council to vote and approve bonding out on those affordable housing dollars and stretching those dollars out farther to build as quickly as we can to meet the demand, meet the needs. But I want to speak a little bit to how this particular project is actually, you were saying it's a call and response in this room, right? It was a call from the community to recognize a historically Black neighborhood that had been displaced in Carytown. So when you come to Ann Arbor, you might come to downtown, you might shop at the farmer's market. You might not realize this was a historically Black community, and residents are now displaced in Ypsi Township and in other townships. And what we wanted to do was make this a conversation, like a deliberate conversation on how we can remedy these inequities that came through in racist zoning, that came through in prioritizing single-family home ownership. And our response was creating a leadership team to have these conversations on saying, this is how we want our history, this community recognized and this history recognized in this new development. And it's named now Dunbar Towers. So creative use on funding by bonding out, responsive use on how we develop and prioritize projects to historically wronged community, I think really points to how Ann Arbor is approaching this, not as kind of just market-driven, needs-driven, social services-driven demand. It's actually a historical response.
I love that.
So I've never seen a program that worked as well as what we did on what was an old idea, down payment assistance last year. If you saw the University of Michigan study that showed in the last 10 years, black wealth in Detroit has grown $3 billion in black home ownership. It's because the property values in the city have nearly tripled in 10 years. I don't know where you put your investments in the stock market. Maybe Doug Song did better, but most of the rest of you would have been better off investing in real estate in Detroit. So if you were a homeowner, you did really well. But if you're a renter, your rents took off on you. And I sit with people who are paying $1,000, $1,200 a month in rent like clockwork. And I said, don't you realize you could buy the house, pay the taxes on it, cheaper than what you're paying in rent? And they'd say to me, but where do I come up with $20,000 in a down payment? So the renters were being left behind. I got elected not by the 200,000 people who moved out of Detroit in the decade before I got there. I got elected by the people who stayed. So we set up a down payment assistance program, but you had to have been a renter in Detroit for the last year, and you had to show us that you were a Detroit resident. We're not doing something for people to move in. And I sat with the banks and said, you can do a down payment assistance up to $20,000, $25,000. We took a chunk of about $12 million in American Rescue Plan money. We didn't know what would happen. Within 9 months, 400 renters had gone through their regular bank mortgage process. Of course, every real estate agent in Detroit is saying, you know about the down payment assistance. So now our real estate agents became huge salespeople for us. They've all been converted to home ownership, 92% African American in the applicants. We did exactly what we wanted in targeting the folks who had left behind. Imagine how your city's changed when you flip 400 renters to 400 homeowners in 1 year. So the banks come back to me, they're loving this, of course, said, do it again. I said, no, wait a minute, not so fast. You guys are making a lot of money on these mortgages. I'll do it again, but you got to be in too. And so we're about to do round 2. This round of $10 million, the banks are putting up 5, and we're matching it with 5, and we're about to go do it again under the same principles. But you have to be thinking, it is a great thing, because for the vast majority of people, your net worth is tied up in your home ownership. It's great to see those property values soaring, except for that neighbor who's renting. And that's what you got to figure out how to do is, can you create a path for that family to build that long-term wealth? And when you talk about flexible funding, this is the thing. If you've got enough flexibility, you have a mix of different kinds of programs that all have a really important role to play.
That's powerful. I mean, and I love that even organically, each of you spoke to the housing crisis also with the racial equity lens, which I think is just really important. When you think about the history of redlining and the areas that many of us were not able to build generational wealth, right? I even think about going north, and many of us could not actually own property in northern parts of the state. So the fact that there's a variety of approaches, but all of those through an equity lens, I think is really important. I want to pivot a little bit. Amy, you mentioned one of the secret weapons to approaching this at the local level is around leadership. And leadership can be very difficult, particularly when you are trying to blend several concepts and ideas and trying to integrate local input. Now, some folks will see, the loud voices at the city council meeting, or individuals who have strong feelings about a new high-rise or apartment complex around the corner. I think each of you can probably speak a little bit to how have you been able to work with local input, neighbors, entities, organizations that have strong feelings, and at the same time provide, strong leadership in order to address the crisis.
Oh, NIMBYs. Yes. I get a lot of calls from NIMBYs. So not in my backyard. Actually brought NIMBY stuffies. I forgot to bring NIMBY stuffies I had for each of you. There's a character who goes around wearing a bee outfit, going to urban planning conferences. I know we like to poke fun at folks who come to city council and are very anxious and worried around multifamily housing, around their home values. They feel very justified in their anger and true hurt. They feel deeply offended that someone would build an apartment building either 100 feet, a couple hundred feet from their homes. And the way I've engaged them has been trying to explain that folks who are trying to come and live in your community probably are already in your community, our community. In Ann Arbor, we have 80,000 daily commuters. These are our nurses, our teachers, our police, our firefighters. In a city of about 110,000, that's like a football game every single day coming in and out of the city. And if we can't fathom who would want to live with us, it's the people who already work with us, for us. And it's a shame. So I try to have these conversations where I speak to our housing crisis, our commuter crisis, our dedication to becoming carbon neutral, and how do we speak to environmentalism too, which means we need to build housing close to where you work, right? We need to build transit so that folks can come into work and send their kids to school in the communities where they work. And I try to, in a progressive town like Ann Arbor, where we have signs for every kind of feeling on our lawns and bumper stickers, one that really stood out to me when I campaigned was "Refugees Welcome Here" in 2020. My parents were refugees from Vietnam and Laos, and I would ask when I went door knocking, when you say "Refugees Welcome Here," do you know where exactly in Ann Arbor? Because I'm on the board of Jewish Family Services, and we do refugee resettlement for the county. And refugees are being housed in hotels, out in the townships, and all the way to Toledo, right? Refugees might be welcomed here, but they're not housed here, and they're not our neighbors. Again, and that's a shame, right? And it speaks to how we've prioritized NIMBY interests who come to city council instead of the most vulnerable folks who don't know who their city council members are, don't know the process, don't know that other people are deciding their future and their children's future and housing access. So this is how housing injustice happens, right? At these meetings at 7 p.m., figuring out how to get on the agenda, how to get on the Zoom call, coming to City Hall. So what we've tried to change is how we do community engagement. And what I'd like to do is I bring food everywhere I go. And it's really hard to yell at your city council member when she brings a tray of baklava made by a Syrian refugee who was resettled by JFS, right? And I can't really say my feelings on a particular development as we do community engagement, but as city staff will introduce me, I'll just say, enjoy the baklava. I have a message from Mohammed Al-Shalabi, who makes the best baklava in Washington County, and that is he would love to be able to live in this city with his family, along with other refugees from the Ukraine, from Afghanistan. I just want our community to be true to our values. I love that.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah. So a couple quick things that I can add to that is when you were talking about meetings, people don't understand the time to attend meetings is often a symptom of systematic privilege and social privilege. And we have to always remember that community engagement doesn't always mean unanimous community agreement. And I think what happens at times is people get caught up in, oh, I want everybody to agree with this project. And you might sit in a political seat and you see the people that's complaining, but you don't see what we see, as either developer or we're providing social. We don't see the mom that came and knocked on our door at her lunchtime and said, hey, I need housing, and we didn't have anything for her. Or we have a waiting list of over 1,000 units on just our waiting list. And when you see that, and when you step in front and you see people fighting, saying, oh, we don't want this housing, we don't want this housing. And you're going, okay, these are people that have the ability to get here. But you have to think about the people that don't have the ability and the people that need to live in that particular housing at that particular site. Also, we also have to take our people's concerns simply that they oppose any new housing, affordable housing near them. And that's more challenging. Like if somebody just totally opposed to something, somebody always told me, if somebody's mind already made up, don't try to change their mind. But focus on the things that you can focus on. If there's a design issue or if there is some type of element or things that you can do, but don't stop progress for stopping progress' sake, trying to say we have to have all the time these kumbaya moments. Sometimes we have to stand up, and when you talk about leadership is really about doing those uncomfortable things at the times in which we are called upon to be leaders. And when we're in those spaces, we have to stand up and say, you know what, everybody's not gonna agree with this thing, but it's the right thing. And the right thing is not allowing people like Mohammed that makes baklava that can't live in his particular community, or recent development that we were working on that we just finished, beautiful development. People were complaining about, we don't want this development in this neighborhood. We don't want it here. It sits right in between downtown and the hospital. And people said, we don't want it, we don't want it. And then somebody said, why don't you just put single family homes there? Just make it all market rate. We don't want these type of people. We cleaned up this neighborhood. Like just throwing out, dispersions. They don't even know the people that's moving in. So I want you to also think about the prejudgment that happens in these particular communities and places, because if we don't start addressing these systematic things and some of the social things that are happening in our community, it's going to be very hard. So yeah, I'm all about, yes, in my backyard. It's just to make sure that we have to think more than just the people who are complaining, but think about those people that we just run into every day, like that person that's at the grocery store that you see that's working there every day, or you go to your favorite bar in your neighborhood and you go there in the evening and you're talking about funding projects and doing all this other stuff. These are some of the very people that need to live in that affordable housing that's driving 45 minutes just to come and serve you every day. So take the construct off of always thinking about it just very bad people, but just these are everyday blue collar people that get up just like us and go to work and try to provide what they can for their family. And that's the framework we need to take when we're looking at providing this equitable development that we're looking to all have in our communities.
But even if you speak to people's sympathies, and if we try to get them to empathize, we also need to educate them on the real economics of increasing supply, right? When we increase supply, we can lower rents, and we see this in other cities around the country, right? Your home value can actually increase when we increase supply, because then you have a thriving community. You have people who want to live there.
But then they say it's going to go down because these people are moving. It's like, no, your property value is going to go up.
Those people could be your grown adult children who come back to the great state of Michigan to raise their grandchildren here, right? I mean,
there's a whole report about it. I don't know if you've heard about this report. Trying
That's
to get
why
people back to
Michigan.
But you're making me appreciate, in some ways our problems are somewhat easier. We've had issues in a couple of cases in neighborhoods with permanent supportive housing, where you take folks who have been chronically homelessness, you put them in a situation where they have mental health support, they have support for addiction, financial literacy, right on site where we've had to do it. But I think about the one I was most concerned about. We had Reverend Jim Holly in Little Rock Baptist Church. If you're not familiar with Detroit, it's a spectacular church on Woodward. Many of the most prominent families in Detroit there. And Reverend Holly says to me, I got this 5-story abandoned building, been abandoned for 20 years, you gotta knock it down. We go in and look at it and say, actually, it's structurally sound. And then we say, actually, it'd be perfect for permanent supportive housing. And so I went back to Reverend Holly, and how this conversation was gonna go. I said, Reverend, I got some good news for you. We can actually renovate that place, but it's gonna be for the formerly homeless. And I didn't know what his reaction was gonna be, and he said to me, that would be great, and I will minister to them and bring them into our congregation and accept them. When you have that kind of support, life is easier. My problem is usually the opposite. I've got a developer who wants to put in housing, and City Council and I are united. You get any tax break from us, 20% of those units are going to be set aside for affordable housing. We got all kinds of housing being built around the Detroit Medical Center and Henry Ford. I believe deeply that the doctors and nurses should live in the same neighborhoods with the people who push the wheelchairs and work in the hospital cafeteria. Maybe not the same units, but that's what our city is about. And at first, that was a concept that was hard for some developers to swallow, but we make the financial terms fair. Now, it's such a part of the culture that when Stephen Ross and Chris Illich got their spectacular new housing approved in District Detroit, 20% of the units in their new apartments are going to be Section 8. That's how much this city has embraced that people of all incomes should be able to live in each neighborhood. But it takes a lot of work, and it means you need to know there is no daylight between the mayor and city council. You can't go appeal because we're unified in our belief on this.
I love this example of working with faith leaders, because I've been chasing after faith leaders in our community saying, have you looked at the size of your parking lot? Right. It's huge, and your setback, and you have an aging congregation, a high cost on trying to maintain your facilities, you could ask all day for your congregants to help fund another food truck, another, another truck for showers and do more work for a warming shelter, or you can actually build housing, right? And the city of Ann Arbor will work alongside you. You could build daycare. You can do so many things with your parcel. Work with us, and we see that happening in Western County. We've seen collaboratives with supportive housing nonprofits and faith leaders, and working to make sure that units are built quickly, even against NIMBYism.
And we've had several churches where they've built the affordable housing, and seniors from their congregation, when they moved out of their houses, moved into the church's affordable housing, which is a win for everybody.
That's right. I just like brag, but in the Senate's recommendations for the budget, we did set aside a little money for faith-based housing options, because we're seeing these models all over the state. And the thing that I hope that, one of the nuggets that I hope you take away is a one-size-fits-all approach just won't get us to the place that we need to be. Either the creativity at the local level, strong leadership, and obviously additional resources from the state and the federal, it will take an all of the above approach. So I have another question, and then we'll start to transition to some of the audience questions, which is around local laws, zoning. Oftentimes when I'm brought in the conversation, it's about money, but from a policy perspective, give us some thoughts about where we should be heading in terms of local, state, even federal laws that might impact our ability to address the crisis. I see one of my favorite Congressman Kildee over there. I know that, how you doing? I know he's, again, very passionate about this topic as well. What can policymakers be doing to help address the crisis?
Speed up your permitting.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I agree, right? A lot of that is at the local level, and some at our level too. We've got to be faster about processing applications at MSHDA and closing on the applications at MSHDA. But the permitting, the site plan approval process, and as well as looking at your zoning. And allowing for a denser housing type. We need a lot of units. We can't take as much land as we have traditionally been taking to build these large single-family homes. We need to allow for a denser housing structure so that we can get done what we need to get done. It also is better for the environment. And we're seeing that people actually like to live in those types of communities that they can see their neighbors. That it's no longer these huge neighborhoods with these big houses on an acre that are purposely built without sidewalks so that people can't come in and they can't converse and they can't drop by. Where we're seeing that people want to live where their neighbors can drop by, where the neighbors can walk out in front, that we can be more social, that we actually need one another. And I think COVID kind of even reinforced that. The problem is a lot of our zoning is so outdated, and our master planning is outdated. And we were very thankful at MSHDA for the state legislature and the Whitmer administration for appropriating funding to MSHDA for our housing readiness grants, which actually provide $50,000 to local governments to help them update their land use policies to make housing, to bring us up into 2024 housing policy and allow us to do denser housing.
Yeah, in Ann Arbor, the city council actually we voted to take ourselves out of the site plan approval process. We already have a planning commission, right? We have our general counsel. Right.
The developers love uncertainty, don't they?
No, not
I mean, I'm sure it makes it cheaper as we debate whether a project is worth coming into your city or not, right? It doesn't. It's permitting, shortening the length for permitting, right? Taking the political aspect out of site plan approval process, trusting our planning commissioners, and also looking at infill, right? I use this example for one of the infill development projects in my ward along a transit corridor, and how it was a response to when Blockbuster had closed. and there was this whole uproar around like whether an infill project in a parking lot would hurt existing businesses. And I had to say, like, if you have to look back to when was the last time you had rented a Blockbuster video, you know how old this conversation is, right? It takes so long to have these conversations, and we need to tighten these timelines up because people are leaving. No one wants to live in a city where electeds just talk about a crisis.
But this is fascinating. Your city council voted to give up their authority to approve this. Was this a hard conversation?
Not for ourselves. I mean,
really,
we're a council that trusts our housing commissioner. We feel like she's one of the most talented housing commissioners in the state. She can get 5-to-1 matches on the funding we give her. I mean, we trust her enough to be able to bond out on this funding, right? We trust her enough to say, here are 12 public parcels, do what you will, find partnerships, find a way to, and not only her, but our city administrator, assistant city administrator, air rights, density infill. I think one of the responses I had to one of the projects was, you had me at density. You bring us a project that can triple the units in an existing footprint. Fantastic. We get more value to our parcels. We get more taxpayers. Hopefully we have more families coming to support our public schools. We really need that right now in Ann Arbor. It's this whole conversation where we know where it works when we insert ourselves and saying, this is what we would like the city to look like, and when we take ourselves out of that conversation where there's no infighting to get in the way of what needs to be done.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and the only quick things I'll add to that is absolutely. So one thing we always say is house people don't park cars. Because when you really think about that concept and you drive through neighborhoods, when we were talking about increasing density, and you drive through some areas and you'll see these seas of parking, your Walmarts, and I'm not talking about anyone negatively, so Walmart, don't come after me, or Target. But when you start to see these, if you start reimagining these spaces having hundreds and hundreds of housing units in these particular areas where we have these large, where there's just nothing there, you will find very quickly that we have more than enough land to build housing. The thing is that we run into is that we become more concerned about us getting into the store to go get, our groceries more than we're worried about individuals that's getting housing in places and services that they particularly need, or even the market rate, because individuals want to be in these walkable, bikeable areas. So we need to find ways to get rid of these large parking spaces, these large parking areas, and think about those as far as when it comes to housing, because instead of me paying $6,000 or $7,000 for a parking space, I would definitely rather spend and put a unit there and give it housing, because guess what? When you talked about the economics, that economics of a person living in that parking space is going to provide you way more return on investment than that parking space that sits there that really might only get full maybe during Thanksgiving and the Black Friday sales, because we have places in our community where it's just empty. So land use reform is definitely that, zoning, everything that everyone says up here, and you just need the leadership to do it. Also, let's talk about permit fees. I'm the developer, so I'm gonna bring it up. Some of these fees, these tap-in fees, work with your developers to try to figure out how to discount some of those things. There's different ways that you can give to a project, or working with the city water departments on, water, I don't know if you can do a water deal. I don't know what it is that you can do, but how creative can we get to make sure that housing become affordable? The developers can develop the sites that they need. Some of these site plan approvals, you'll end up having to go through special land use. You end up paying, $10,000 just in fees, and then another $100,000 in architectural fees redoing your plans. You shouldn't have to do all that. As Mayor Duggan said, how do you get things to be swifter and faster? So we need to think about efficiency, but that's great to hear about what your community has done as far as taking the site plan out, but you can get around some of those things with having an approved city master plan, or I like to, instead of calling master plans, because that's a little comprehensive community plans. How about that? Yeah. We'll just say comprehensive community plan that really can speak to your zoning, and what you can do from a density perspective.
How do you feel about the fees for connecting to utilities?
Oh, that's what I was talking about, the
infrastructure?
tap fees. Oh yeah, those definitely could be a lot cheaper. So I mean, you know.
We might need help from the state.
Yeah.
Which transitions me to one of my first questions, which is, this audience member mentioned that a lot of the conversations around what needs to be done is at the local level in terms of zoning and tax credits, et cetera, but specifically, what can folks at the state level be doing to help urge local action? So are there any specific policy bills or ideas that we should be championing at the state level?
You know, the best thing you could do for us is to have a dedicated source of funds that every year we know X amount is going to be available. Predictability is what we all would like. If we can plan, a lot of times we miss when we apply for a federal LIHTC. We have to come back 6 months, 12 months later. Predictability is what we need. If Lansing could find some kind of dedicated source of funds, we knew how much there was, it would allow all of us to make better planning.
Absolutely.
It would build the industry, because with reliability, we would have more people coming in doing development, knowing that there's funding year after year after year. While we do love one-time appropriations, we take them any way we can. Consistent funding makes a huge difference.
And just a commercial, we did put in $50 million in perpetuity for housing, and it's very nimble, very flexible. So we did that last year.
That's terrific. Are you going to do it again with SOAR?
So this is already connected to CIT, so there's no end date.
I was just asking about the next thing that might come. You know me.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
What's next?
And we don't know yet, but negotiations are happening right now.
But you're fighting for us.
Always, always. All right, here's the next question. So they mentioned that several of the solutions that are coming before you today have been for bigger cities. Think Detroit, Saginaw, Flint, Ann Arbor. But talk to us a little bit about solutions for smaller communities, because they do make up the lion's share of the state.
You know, I think a lot of our funding at MSHDA is intentionally distributed across the state. And I know earlier I mentioned the My Neighborhood program, our new program. We actually use data to determine how much each region is allocated or targeted to be allocated. And, you know, it's not all going to Region O, which happens to be the city of Detroit, right? So that is. And we do that with Missing Middle, also had a rural set aside, also had a target across the state, had 5% for the Upper Peninsula specifically. So I would say our low-income housing tax credit has a rural set aside as well. So we really do work hard to make sure it just doesn't go to the big cities. The big cities have high needs. The big cities also have funding to help layer on our current funding, which helps get a lot more housing done. But we feel, you know, the crisis is felt across the state. We want to make sure to help everyone where we can, and we do it in a very purposeful way. In fact, our housing readiness grants that I mentioned, we actually took that funding and broke it into two. One for redevelopment ready communities, which is an MEDC designation, which means you're a fairly high capacity local government. But we also took a bigger chunk for non-RCC, meaning lower capacity communities, so that all the higher capacity folks didn't come in and take all the money. And so that program is still open. All the high capacity money gone, because they were ready with their applications. But we still have about $1.3 million left for those smaller communities that need a minute to understand the program. They need to be able to find resources in which to decide how they would want to use those fundings and apply.
But what Amy's pointing out is it's amazing how similar the problem is from the biggest city to the smallest city. I sat in this room on this panel 2 years ago explaining what we were doing, and when it ended, the first guy that came up to me, maybe here now, is the housing director in Traverse City. And he says, I can't get the affordable housing for the workers to support the summer activity. He had exactly the same gap problem in Traverse City that we had in Detroit. But Amy's point is, I have a whole team of people that will snatch up the first time the dollars are awarded, and she's trying to level it off. But actually, no matter how big or small you are, what you're trying to do is figure out the gap between what that builder needs to build at and what your folks can afford to pay. It really is just a question of the size and the capacity, right?
And this is where philanthropy can really have a stronger role too, right? So besides city council member, I wear another hat as one of the founders of the Song Foundation. And the conversations we've been having with other family offices and family foundations around the state is how do you use impact investment in helping municipalities meet housing demands. And rural communities does come up pretty frequently. Some of these families were based or came into wealth from rural communities, right? So how do you not only just bring that issue up in philanthropy, but how do you find funding partners with each other, right? So we have one family foundation that's partnering with us to help fund a market rate study in Washington County, housing market rate study and affordable housing study that hasn't been updated since 2015. But instead of having our municipals or the county or the city take on the cost, philanthropy will take on that cost, right? And then that's the entire county. And Washington County is not just Ann Arbor. We have Tecumseh, Chelsea. We've got small, very rural townships. It feels like Ann Arbor is bigger and more urban because we have a green belt around it, but really surrounding areas are very rural. And I feel like this is where there's an opportunity to go to philanthropy and say, I'm glad you have these feelings about our communities. We need to see these dollars come.
Well, and the impact investing is huge, right? Like as Glenn said, everyone doesn't need a grant, but as interest rates are increasing, philanthropy can come to the table to help bring down those interest rates by using some of their funds to do either mission-related investments or,
And I'll
PRIs.
give a quick example. We just worked with here recently the Ruth Mott Foundation on our Missy Middle project to get some gap financing to bridge the missing middle funds because the interest rate was too high, but they were able to come in with a low interest PRI investment like 3.5%, 4%, but it was something that we could afford. And so the thing is, it gave the philanthropy a different way to play a position in helping us leverage some funds in our particular community. Because, everybody doesn't have, as we know, these different foundations in their community. And to get back kind of what you were talking about with your question about rural communities, as we've been working and talking to, looking at projects in rural communities and working on them, like Mayor Duggan said, the issue is still the same. But one thing, I don't know if Amy mentioned this already, sorry if I'm bringing this up again, but one thing that they really did was a really good job of trying to make sure there's equitable disbursement of funding. They brought together the regional housing plan. And the regional housing plan where they, bisected the state in the different quadrants to make sure that they were able to bring in all these groups from rural communities, neighborhood groups, and we were in Region 8, and we went all the way out to Port Huron, the Thumb, and up as well, and we had a lot of rural communities. And the thing is, when we sat down at the table, one thing that everybody was saying, we need more housing, we need more gap financing, we need flexible funding, we want to build more single family, we need multifamily, we need preservation of old existing senior properties that's in a lot of these rural communities that they needed to preserve, or people just needed different things, roof repairs or whatever it could be in their particular neighborhood. So I think what that does, what it done and what it will do is really catapulting this idea of understanding that as a collective we're all struggling when it comes to housing.
We all also,
this is not a rural issue. This is not a city issue. This is a state issue. This is an issue about humanity and about us trying to figure out ways that we can solve this problem collective together. So, Amy, so I'll give you kudos definitely on that with the regional housing plan because we were a lead in that area because I think that really helped people to coalesce around the idea like, man, we all got this problem.
If I could, just one thing, because I know we have this congressman here.
Yeah.
And I keep pressing on the fact that this is we're in a national housing crisis, right?
Yeah.
So this is across the country, and we've never been in a housing crisis like this in our lifetimes. But yet we're not seeing the response from the federal government. right? Usually the federal government steps up, we're in a national crisis. But I had a question from a reporter earlier today, and my jaw just dropped it, my response, and she's like, is housing gonna impact the presidential campaign? And I was like, oh, I haven't heard one of them say one darn word about housing yet. So no, I don't think it's gonna impact the campaign, but it should, because housing is so foundational to the success of this country, yet our federal government is not stepping up to provide additional funding for housing, nothing. In fact, our HUD budget basically decreased, right? So in a time we're in a housing crisis, we're actually getting less money, no increase in the low-income housing tax credit. So we push you all at the state, please, please give us money, which, thank you, we appreciate it. But we also are kind of letting our federal lawmakers off the hook when they really should be stepping up.
Yeah.
That's our way of saying, Senator, you have been phenomenal.
Yeah.
There's a reason you're moderating this panel, and we all want to say thank you for what you've done to fight for affordable housing.
We're doing our best. All right. A few more minutes and a few more questions for you. All right, I'll read this one verbatim. As the panel has mentioned, creating equitable and diverse projects is important. What are your thoughts on grouping and scaling emerging development firms?
Ooh,
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that. Oh, man. Amy knows a little of my story here. But when I was first starting out in development, I mean, there was really not a lot of help. And when I say not a lot of help, it was more or less me figuring it out. So at that time, Gary Heidel was the director. I think we had a few directors at the time. I used to call Gary Heidel's phone probably every 5 seconds about something when I was learning this. I mean, it was, Gary, I need to learn this. Oh, I need to learn. He's like, oh, Glenn, call this person. I'll call. And the thing is, what you find out is that it's okay to know what you don't know, but when it comes to emerging developers, the biggest thing is that I think, and as I've said, I don't think, but what Michigan's doing is working around the idea of saying, okay, how do we get experienced developers with non-experienced developers and try to figure out how do we get them together where the for-profit developer or nonprofit developers are not losing, but it's helping build the scale of the newer developers. So the emerging developer aspect was put out there, is in the QAP now. And so we have been talking to, we actually turned in an application with an emerging developer in Flint, and then we have 2 other developers, minority developers, that we're working with across the state right now that are looking to turn in additional projects. So I will just say, I think it's great, to see developers that are emerging, but also just for me, like I had, it wasn't, I mean, the development world is competitive. And there's not a lot of developers, what I found out, that do it right. So there's a lot of people who develop, but there's a difference between people who do development that are consistent with your values as a developer. So the other thing is, instead of just, creating these hodgepodge and say, oh, just go partner with a developer, you will find out that people are not consistent with who you are as an individual, the things that you're trying to do, the lives that you might be trying to change. Some people just say, hey, I'm just providing housing. That's what I do as a developer. But when it comes to providing services, when it comes to, doing all that extra, that's all on you. You get what I'm saying? So for me, it was trying to find those partners. But I think it's a great idea. I'm glad that we're participating in it. I'm looking forward to grow, and it's amazing because I feel like I'm always still learning. Yeah. So now to be 14 years, into doing development is kind of, and I'm still, I guess I say I'm still fairly young. It's amazing now to kind of be on the other end and having these conversations with the developers who are coming to you saying, hey, I got a project I want to pitch to you, and you're like, what? I just started getting full development point experience. Yeah. I want to, but.
And I have to applaud Mishda for also leading the charge on emerging developers. And I forgot which state of the city it was, but you highlighted some of the amazing work that's happening in Detroit related to emerging developers. So
the only way you can build the capacity, you need a whole lot of developers. You got to bring your entire talent pool along.
That's right. That's right.
Need more people at the table.
That's right. Listen, would you all please join me in thanking this powerful panel today? So I encourage you to reach out to them individually, their teams, continue this conversation amongst yourself around our housing crisis and ways that we can maybe in the next 5 or 10 years not have to discuss this again. So thank you again.
Thanks.
Yes.
From Delta faucets to Behr paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit PBS. Among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving, we support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Learn more at dtefoundation.com.
We help organizations find their voices through what they do and who they impact. We are VVK PR and Creative, a Detroit agency telling the stories of critical issues affecting the big picture and the small moments. Stories at Skyline Heights and on-the-ground influence. We lead with relationships first, solutions always, and with diversity as our compass. VVK PR and Creative.